Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Tamara Leisure Experience's second conversation that we're having, focusing in on everything to do with World Environment Day. This is the second time that we're hosting a set of conversations of this sort, and we'll be talking a lot about environmental responsibility during this time with several diverse and innovative climate advocates. And so it's our great pleasure, it's my great pleasure to welcome Maya Kumble today, an avid wildlife photographer, to come and talk to us. Maya, I'll just give a brief intro about you and everything that you're doing. Maya is a 12th standard student at the International School Bangalore, where incidentally my brother also attended. He is a wildlife enthusiast and has already authored a coffee table book called Safari Saga: Wild Encounters of a Young Photographer. I believe that you picked a lot of this skill up and this interest up by learning from your own father, who is a well-known wildlife photographer. But you've also been mentored by renowned wildlife photographer Jayant Sharma as well. Phenomenal. So thanks again for joining us. Welcome. So just to get kickstarted, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey, how you were led down this path, what piqued your interest, what continues to excite you about wildlife photography, and maybe some of the influences that your father had on you, or Jayant Sharma had on you, or any others that you've seen who are doing similar or adjacent work.
Right. Yeah. So for as long as I can remember, I've always had an innate love for the wild. We've always gone on family vacations to wildlife parks and sanctuaries throughout India. And obviously, when I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, I would sleep through the morning and not attend the morning safari, but the afternoon safari would always be something that I was very excited to and I would look forward to. And I think the entire family as a whole had a drought of tigers, in the sense that we didn't see a tiger in the wild for nearly, I think my mom didn't see it for nearly 20 years, and I hadn't seen it yet. So the earliest trip I can remember is 2011. We were in Kanha National Park, and then we went to Pench. So those are two very prominent sanctuaries in Madhya Pradesh. And I think it was an experience to remember because I would always miss a tiger whenever I went. But then in the morning, when the rest of the family would go, they'd get 4 or 5 tigers standing in a line, just sort of waiting to get photographed. And I think that's when this sort of sparked an interest in me, that in the sense that I finally realized that you can't just walk into, or rather drive into a wildlife park and expect, a galore of sightings. It requires a lot of patience and a lot of commitment, which of course I didn't have at the time. But
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Yeah. 1 second. I think my video is glitching. I'll just rejoin in a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, 1 second.
Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulty. Sure, Mayas will be really back really soon. If any of you, sorry, I forgot to mention this, but if any of you have any questions that you'd like for me to ask Mayas, just leave them in the chat, please, and we'll certainly get to them towards the end of the conversation. I think he's back.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I'm back.
All good?
Yeah.
So you were saying about sort of that first time where you realized that you needed to be patient, I guess,
Yeah.
to witness wildlife in its natural state. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. But so that's when I sort of understood what it takes to actually see, the sort of things that you see on the internet or on Instagram, what it takes to experience it firsthand. That's when I finally understood at a very young age. But then my passion for photography actually started. Uh, it's been 5 years now. So 5 years ago, uh, we planned a family trip to Ranthambore. It's a fantastic national park in Rajasthan, just a couple hours away from the capital city. And I think that right before the trip, I was speaking to my dad, and he said that, look, it's a week-long trip. You're eventually going to get bored if you just sit there. So how about you pick up a camera and let me teach you, the basics. See how you like it, because it's always nice to appreciate and document uh, things like nature. So of course I agree. And I remember practicing, around the house, trying to understand basic concepts like exposure and shutter speed and all of that.
Aperture and all that. Yeah.
And exactly, yeah. And after I got a sort of crash course from him, um, I remember entering the first safari with no battery in the camera, which was kind of a disappointment. But fortunately, the rest of the trip went in our favor. We finally ended the drought I'd mentioned, the drought of tiger sightings, with I think 22 tiger sightings in
What?
in a span of 7 trips. So that obviously that
That's
got me
awesome.
really excited, and at least at that moment in time, I hadn't really prioritized the rest of the animals, but it was something that, of course, got me excited and told me that, look, this could be a very exciting hobby. And I think the main reason was because I saw an opportunity to get, uh, to bond with my dad even more, obviously. And I thought that there are many invaluable lessons and techniques that he could teach me, um, that I could sort of carry forward, not only into my professional life, but just life in general. So I decided to take it up as a serious hobby, and then I think, like you mentioned, I was mentored by Giant. He has a fantastic organization that he runs called Toehold, and they offer some great courses, and he's just been a fantastic teacher and mentor. And of course, after learning the basics from my dad and Giant, I started going on trips with some of my close friends who are also great wildlife photographers, and I think that's when I sort of realized that this is a hobby that will stick for life, because I found it to be very enthralling, and it just gave me an excuse to get away from the busy city, and just find some time to be one with the wild.
I would imagine it can be quite meditative, even because
Exactly.
you have to be so patient, right? And it's you there's nothing you can really do to influence how an animal is going to behave, or you know um anything really. I mean, it feels like, can that be frustrating at times? Like you can't control it at all, and you just have
Yeah.
to kind of be very calm. Like I feel like I would find it frustrating. I guess that's why I'm asking. Yeah.
No, I completely understand what you mean, because I think that the first couple months, I was very impatient. I think I was for a long time I was very impatient until I took up wildlife photography as a hobby. And obviously, my father, he's very calm, and he would sort of say, don't get impatient, because from his experience, and now after 5 years, I can sort of verify. He told me that the wild always sort of reveals its true self to those who are patient, and I think that after 5 years, it's safe to say that that sort of paid off. But initially, it was very frustrating, not to get a particular bird or animal, or even a particular subject in, doing something that it's known for, let's say a hornbill eating a fig, getting that perfect shot. It's a
Right.
bit frustrating, but I think, just like any other hobby or any other profession, you sort of learn from the mistakes, you learn from uh, the frustrating experiences, and then, you hopefully get to cherish some better ones.
Has there ever been a moment that has surprised you during, like, during that journey, like where you're, I guess, I mean, you're saying like, okay, there's sort of, you sometimes have an idea of what you would like to capture, right? But are there moments where you've taken a photograph and it's kind of been unexpected, the result of what you get?
Yeah, there's actually a photograph I shared with you, and
Yeah,
I
let me
think that
try to,
it's the two tigers fighting. So,
okay, I'm gonna try to get it,
of
but,
course, yeah.
um, so that functionality, hold on, shoot. I am having trouble. I don't know if you know how to do it because I'm not seeing the button that I
I
was supposed to.
don't know if I can,
I see
you know,
filters. All right, I'm so sorry. I'm having, how do I do it? Sorry.
I think worst case I can always sort of show it here. I'll just try to
Yeah,
find the
sure. Yeah,
image.
that would be great. I'm
Yeah,
so
I'll
sorry.
just
Yeah,
show
I'm
it.
just
I'll just
not able
raise it up
to
to the
figure it out.
screen. Yeah. um, Let me find it. So it's downloading. Hasn't, yeah.
Okay.
So this is the image I was talking about. Um, it's one of my most favorite images. It's two tigers fighting, and essentially, if I may sort of explain the story behind it, what happened was, so we were following Maya, and she's India's most photographed tigress, at least in recent times. Before, I think it was Machli, a very famous tigress from Ranthambore, and now it's Maya. So we were
Okay.
sort of tracking her, and we noticed that she suddenly became agitated, and we heard some sort of conversations in nearby jeeps and canters that, oh yeah, there might be another tigress, but we sort of dismissed that because what's the probability that two tigers would fight, or whatever it is. At least that's what I thought. I completely underestimated Taroba because what actually ended up happening was there was another invading tigress in Maya's territory, and she actually, I think she came for the cubs. So Maya ended up chasing her to sort
Hmm.
of try to get her out of the territory, and then that's when I got that shot of them fighting. And coming back to your question, Shruti, what surprised me was after the fight ended, and Maya sort of emerged as the clear winner. It was very diplomatic. She just walked the tigress out. She didn't, there wasn't any further brawl or anything. She just walked her
Right.
out. You know. So that was
So
that
it
was
was like that,
something.
just that momentary, like that, like sort of that conflict happened, and then it kind of
Exactly.
just interesting. It's yeah, you never think that, like, I mean, I guess in human nature, right? You always imagine that these sorts of conflicts will have an impact, but they just kind of roll off the
Exactly.
shoulder and then they're good. Very nice. Okay, so in terms of information that is available to us today, right? A lot of the information we now get is absorbed through images. It's absorbed. We receive a lot of sound bites, and it's a lot of sort of very short headline information, right? In terms of what we consume, the information we consume, and a lot of it is either photographic, video, or sound bites. So in that sort of age of social media and these sort of those headline, where you only sort of see that top line thing, how do you find that photography, and the photography that you do particularly, how has it become a tool that you could use in activism? And specifically in, how do you raise more awareness for wildlife conservation and all those sort of all issues around wildlife. Is there something that you've been doing, or is there something that you've seen evolve over the last couple of years? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question, because initially when I started my journey into wildlife photography, I didn't actually have any social media. So, the sharing of images was initially just sort of uh, among family, friends, and maybe school teachers and such. Um, but I think a year later, that's when I got social media, and I immediately realized that it was going to help me reach a larger, much greater audience, and an audience that actually cares and could positively be impacted by my work. So that's something that you can't really take away from social media, because it's just helped me sort of expand my work, helped uh, tons of photographers really expand their work. And personally, I think it's really helped me raise awareness about many vulnerable and endangered species I've encountered in the wild, like the Egyptian vulture, which I think I've also shared a photograph with you.
I'm having trouble. I'm sorry, I'm not able to
Yeah,
show
yeah,
it.
that's fine though. It's on my
If
feed.
you have it.
And then also there's the leopards and the Indian eagle owl, of course. That's another very uh, hugely endangered species. And these are the sort of species that, you know, 10, 20 years ago, without Instagram, without Facebook, not a lot of people would have actually cared for or even heard of. So it's just nice to sort of be able to spread awareness. And what I've noticed is not just birds and animals, but even frogs and snakes. A lot of individuals interested in wildlife and photography, they've really taken a keen interest in herping and trying to find some very endemic frogs and snakes in the western parts, which I really appreciate, because of course, I mean, you're just revealing more of what nature has in store to so many people, and it's just things like that that really make uh, you know social media extremely beneficial. And I think that it's also important to note that the medium is such that it allows photographs to remain in the audience's mind for a lot longer, because you're scrolling endlessly uh, day in and day out, and let's say you see something that catches your eye, maybe a nice shot of a very rare primate or whatever it is. It's obviously going to stay in your mind, and what that essentially does is it ensures that pivotal discussions occur between you and your friends, you and your family, maybe even you and other individuals interested in similar causes, and that essentially ensures the effective spread of awareness, which um, you know, of course, a lot of photographers want, because I think there are two types of wildlife photographers. There's the one who's an artist first, and there's the one who's a wildlife lover first. And the beauty of social media is such that even though the wildlife photographer who's an artist first, they needn't necessarily have that uh, idea in the back of their mind that I really want my photos to raise awareness. That still ends up happening. It's a sort of byproduct of them posting their and sharing their images with the rest of the world, and sort of even more, even sort of enhancing these species. It just really ensures that there's more awareness that's spread, which is of course fantastic. That that's not even their motive, and they're still achieving it. And I think a great example of or rather a direct answer to your question in terms of an example would be this one website. So I can't really remember the name. Giant and I, whenever we would speak, he'd bring it up a lot, and I remember it because in 2011, this also helped raise my interest in wildlife. So in 2011, this was, I think this website later on became Nature and Focus.
Okay.
But at the time, essentially photographers would share their images on the network, and you could see that, okay, and obviously the images would be geotagged, so you could also say that, oh wow, there's a lot of sightings here, or there's a lot of tigers here. So in 2011, the tiger craze was real. And I say real. When I say real, I mean real in the sense that now if you sort of visit 6 of the most populous national parks in India in terms of tiger population, you're bound to get at least one sighting, right? Unless your luck is just sort of
really bad. Yeah.
exactly.
No, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, but statistically, at least you should at least get one sighting. But when I was just getting into wildlife at the age of 7 or 8, 10 years ago, excuse me, I was what I noticed was that there were people who complained about how they went months on end without seeing even a leopard or even an elephant actually. And what's ironic is now the elephant drought still exists, especially in places like Kabini. I've not seen an elephant in a long time. I mean, I've not gone to Kabini that frequently in the last year either because of my uh, other commitments. But that's something I've noticed that I think with the tiger craze, everyone sort of focused on the tigers, and obviously they're coming out a lot more, but the elephants have shied away. I don't know if there's a correlation necessarily.
You should go to Chikmagalur. Chikmagalur,
of course.
You see good elephants, yeah.
Yeah, of course. But I think in national parks, I've sort of seen at least sightings dwindle, sightings of elephants. The population is still healthy, it's still growing strong. But yeah, ultimately, what I'm trying to convey is that, that website sharing photos of tigers, I think if you even have a little bit of uh, interest in wildlife, it would make you sort of want to drop everything and just visit the nearest national park, just spend half a week there and try to cite what these people have cited and witnessed. And I think that's essentially the beauty of it all, right? It's helping so many individuals out there create art that not only appeals to the masses but also benefits the subjects. So
Yeah, no, I think it is it's interesting, right, that you say that. I mean, we are kind of blessed in a way in India that there is a lot of wildlife, and it is now quite easy in a sense to see a tiger, right? I mean, you're right. Like you have to be fairly unlucky to miss it. And I think what's also kind of amazing is that like, you know, okay, I'm much older than you, but when I was very young, right? When I was 7 or 8, really the only way for you to be able to see really interesting wildlife photography was by picking up National Geographic or by picking up one of these like, kids wildlife magazines or things like that they had. And you didn't, and it seemed very far away. Like it seemed like you had to be a journalist or you had to be, really serious. Yeah, you had to be a professional to be able to do something like that. And I think what's interesting about social media is that it has kind of enlightened everyone that, everyone can have a part to play in this. And like you said, you could do it just for fun, you could do it for artistic reasons, or you could do it because you have some serious like interest in raising awareness or, going behind a cause. And it really, I mean, it has made it such that it feels like it's much closer now. Like the subjects are so much closer to us as individuals rather than kind of displaced. I have to tell you, so I went to Chikmagalur a year ago, and I'm forgetting the park, which is there. There is a national park nearby that we went to. And we saw a herd of wild elephants that were walking around. And there was a mother and a baby, and I saw the baby nursing from the mother. And it was like the most incredible thing, right? And it's memorable, I think, and it completely like it changes the way that I look at elephants. And I think about elephants because you're kind of like, I have little kids, right? So I'm kind of like, oh, this elephant's just like me. Even it might sound silly, but it kind of, I think when you witness it and then you're able to capture it and go back to that memory over and over again, it triggers something very emotional in the head, right? And wildlife is something, especially like, I don't know, elephants, of course, tigers, like there's something so
Mesmerizing.
simple, mesmerizing, it connects. Like it's I don't know. It's I mean, I'm sure you feel this all the time, but it's like this inexplicable feeling that you get where you're like, wow, like we're all on this planet together. We're somehow coexisting and all of that. And of course, I think that has, it's also the fact that it is so close. I mean, there are problems that have now arisen, right? Because, we have growing population. People are more and more going into the land, which should be allocated to wildlife. There's a ton of encroachment. There's a lot of human wildlife conflict that is now happening. Yesterday, actually, on our live, I spoke a little bit about, the farmer wildlife conflict, which is happening, which is really dangerous, both for the wildlife as well as the humans who are living on the boundaries of those national parks. We see it here in our state of Karnataka quite a lot, but across the country, across the world, human wildlife conflict is becoming a real issue. So I was wondering, what do you think are the key issues that we should be focusing on in terms of preservation and conservation of wildlife? And what do you think are the key areas that we should be prioritizing? What are the ones that we can attack? Do you have any ideas about how we could attack that? And then, go ahead, please.
I think that, like you already mentioned, human-animal conflicts are some of the worst threats to wildlife. Of course, we have some scenarios where they're pretty bad threats to the humans, and they might result in the death of a human. I think some pretty well-known human-wildlife conflicts are a couple years ago, a tiger entered a farmer's land near Kabini. And I think the tiger either killed livestock or something along those lines, which of course is sort of detrimental to the farmer's lifestyle. Exactly. And there are, of course, so many incidents of leopards, entering the city in Mumbai, in Mysore, in villages. And I think the most significant problem, especially in Indian villages, is just this false confidence among villagers and the mishandling of snakes, because there have been so many snake deaths reported. I think there have only been human deaths reported in a snake-human conflict when this snake was venomous. But I think from what I've noticed, the general trend is that when the snake is non-venomous, it ends up sort of getting adversely affected by the incident.
Right.
And I think that, this is a direct consequence of habitat loss, which is exactly my next point. I think tackling habitat loss and ensuring that we conserve and protect our existing ecosystems would be the game changer, because we have very small scale ecosystems like trees, and they can make all the difference. And I'll actually explain why, because I have a sort of major point for all of this. But these small scale ecosystems can sort of make or break, and a small scale ecosystem is literally, like I said, anything as simple as a tree. So what's important is not only conserving our existing ecosystems, but trying to cultivate new ones, and hopefully growing a lot of trees along maybe the anywhere, hopefully, but ideally urban areas, because we need trees. They're rapidly depleting in cities, so that would be the best course of action there. And I think another important thing to note is that I believe wildlife conservation needs to become climate responsive, because climate change and the decline of wildlife populations are actually correlational. One is causing the other. And I think I can directly sort of quote IUCN here, because they said that the decline of species and ecosystems actually accelerates climate change, which then creates a sort of feedback loop. Exactly, right. A sort of cycle, a feedback loop that further worsens the situation. And that's exactly why I said that, even the smallest of ecosystems can make or break, you know, our futures, because the effects of climate change on even the smallest species and the smallest populations, things as small as water bears. I don't remember the scientific name, but water bears, they're microscopic animals, to as large as, blue whales. The effect of climate change on all these species can threaten ecosystems and, as well as species across the food chain, which further reiterates my previous point about how small ecosystems can make all the difference. And essentially, how we could sort of tackle both climate change and wildlife conservation would would be to perform tasks that actually form under the umbrella of both climate change and wildlife conservation. So that would be tasks like afforestation, and maybe even trying to strike a balance in the food chain by ensuring that either the apex predators or the prey don't die out, because either one would be detrimental to the ecosystem that the prey and predator exist in. So that's essentially my response.
I mean, around climate responsiveness, I mean, we've heard this thought about pollinators, and that's been a big message, right? Like, if climate change impacts the way that pollinators behave,
It would
that
really.
has this sort of cascading impact on everything that happens in that ecosystem, straight down to the wildlife, straight down to everybody. Um, and it's a really interesting point, right? I have not heard this point that the loss of wildlife causes more climate change, but that also makes sense, because same thing, right? As soon as you lose the pollinators, everything starts to get squeezed, in a
Exactly.
sense. Um, it's a really interesting point. I think there's there's so much, I guess there's so much to do, right, when it comes to this topic and this idea, and there's not really any singular simple solution. And
Exactly.
as it's something that we all have to work on. So Tamara Leisure Experiences, we're a hospitality company, and we focus a lot on this idea of responsible hospitality. And we don't have a wildlife property yet, but at some point it would be great to have sort of a nature-centric property which focuses on wildlife, and um, bringing this idea that we have in terms of bringing awareness to the environment, and bringing thoughtful sort of visitation to that, to that place. It would be great for us to be able to bring that. But in the meantime, you have a lot of concepts, with hospitality concepts, tours, which are focused on wildlife, which are nature centric and are focused on sort of getting out there. You have photo tours. You also have just discovery tours of seeing, myself, like in Kabini, I've done, the river tour, the river safari, the jeep safari. We've all done, various versions of that. Um, how do you think that travelers could be better informed when they're doing nature-centric trips? And how do you think they can remain conscious of the impact that they have on the environment and the community and the wildlife itself as they're going on these journeys?
Okay, so of course, I think the most generic advice anyone could sort of give to travelers would be don't litter, always sort of keep the environment in mind, so on and so forth. But I'm just going to go ahead assuming that that's a given.
Yeah,
And
I think so. It's fair.
yeah, so some important points would be, personally, I would say exploit travelers should really be exploiting the resources of wherever they are at. And I don't mean that literally, I mean exploit the resources in the sense that I think one of my most memorable trips was actually at the Tamara Cool. And yeah, and we went on a nature walk. And I still remember that, I can still sort of recall many details from that nature walk, because the naturalist was just um, so into explaining, the sort of features of the plants and bugs and lizards that we'd see on the way. And, it's things like that that would sort of make a tourist really conscious of their environment and wildlife, right? Because you're discovering, or at least in my case, I discovered a lot of floral and plant species that were endemic to Coorg, thanks to that one nature walk. So that's definitely something that travelers and tourists should really focus on, which is don't just maybe okay one day is allowed, but don't just sit in the hotel room. It's comfort, it's comfortable, of course, but try to get out there and really understand your surroundings. And one thing that I tell all of my friends who tell me that they're going to visit a wildlife sanctuary or park, and they don't know which one to choose. Uh, I mean, I think if they really sort of are persistent about getting a tiger sighting, or they really want to chase, let's say, the black panther, then the first choice would be to Kabini. But I think what I've done in the past is actually the opposite. I've recommended lesser known sanctuaries, uh, especially ones that are my favorites, like Ramnagra Vulture Sanctuary, just an hour drive away from Bangalore. And there's the Ranganthittu Bird Sanctuary, which is again 2 hours away from Bangalore, and the Daroji Bear Sanctuary, which is a couple hours away, but again, fantastic sanctuary. And not only are these sanctuaries less busy, because the busier ones, the sort of main tourist attractions, you need to sort of pray that you'll even get some space in the jeeps. But here, it's just you might even be the only tourist in the sanctuary if you're lucky. And like I said, not only is it less busy, it's also going to help spread awareness and the conservation of these vulnerable species. Because, for instance, in the Ramnagra Vulture Sanctuary, um, it's actually not a sanctuary in the literal sense. When I say sanctuary, a lot of my friends they immediately think, okay, yeah, you're going to sit in a jeep, you're going to go around with a camera in your hand, but the Ramnagra Wildlife Sanctuary is just hills, it's just peaks. You just walk around until you see Egyptian vultures flying, and Egyptian and long-billed vultures flying in the air, and resting on higher branches and whatnot. So they're not sanctuaries in the literal sense, and in fact, that's exactly my point, because before the area was established as a sanctuary, there weren't many visitors, but after it really sort of helped not only contain the vultures, but also boost tourism in Ramnagar and specifically the wildlife sanctuary area. So that's just something that would definitely help, and obviously it would be a great experience for a tourist as well, because at least to a true wildlife lover, if a tourist comes back from a vacation to an exclusive place like the ones I mentioned, and then they said that I saw these many Egyptian vultures, I think a true wildlife lover would understand the value, and some might even prioritize that over a boring tiger sighting, like just a tiger sleeping or something. You'd much rather see two Egyptian vultures nest than just a tiger sitting. So that possibility is always there with these
And
lesser known.
to be able to also do that on feet, right? I think that's a
Exactly.
pretty interesting experience as
Yeah.
well. Um, Interesting. I think you also brought up a point on, there's this concept of over tourism, right? Which
Exactly.
we have seen. And particularly, I would imagine that there are a few destinations, wildlife destinations, which have seen that, right? And as a result, the animals could be disturbed. You're, as tourists, you're kind of struggling. You feel disappointed when you're not able to see something, or you're, a certain animal, or you're disappointed because you haven't gotten a spot on the jeep. So I think that it's interesting, right, to say that if there was a way in which we could identify some of these smaller places where you still have a really good chance of seeing something which is, of interest, maybe not a tiger, but something else. Like, I think that's really interesting. There's also a lot of, I don't know if you've heard like of concepts like this, where there are national parks where they limit the number of people that come in during the day, right? So you can actually go online and you can see, okay, how many people have booked for the day, and based on
Exactly.
that you can say, okay, I'm going to go at this time slot on this day, because they say, okay, only 300 people are allowed inside at this time. And I saw during
Exactly.
COVID actually that this picked up, and people like for instance in Bangalore, we were booking it because, one, we wanted physical distance, but two, it was a much more enjoyable experience as, as the tourist, because, you have sort of the space to see, and you feel like you're not impacting the environment as much
Exactly.
by being there and influencing that place. So that was something actually, it was an interesting, I hadn't thought about it, but it's an interesting side
No,
effect
it's
of COVID in a way. Yeah.
exactly. No, I think that's a perfectly valid point. It was actually my last point that I was going to cover. So, you sort of summed it up for me, which
Sorry.
is perfect. But what I wanted to say is, to all the tourists listening, don't always focus on the main attractions, because A, that leads to disappointment. So if you're not expecting anything, you can't be disappointed. And B, you sort of over romanticize these animals like the Black Panther, and that's not healthy for the national park as a whole, because in case, um, obviously in the future, the the inevitable demise of the main attraction is going to come, and when it comes, you need to give yourself a reason to obviously revisit the park. And if you don't just focus on the main attractions, then you can find so many other reasons, which is exactly why, no matter what safari I'm on, I always try to make good images out of even the most ordinary subjects, because I don't necessarily want to come back home with a hard drive full of, uh, good images of a rare subject. I just want good images at the end of the day, which is exactly why I try to uh, enjoy the entirety of the park, so I can better appreciate nature as a whole. And that's really helped me understand the importance of conserving these animals. And that's exactly what I would hope everyone else would do as well.
So that kind of brings me to my last question, and then we're going to open it out and take a look at what are the questions that have come in during the session. And we've gotten a few. Um, how do you believe that organizations and businesses can be more responsible and adopt more wildlife sensitive developments in construction and operations? Do you have any thoughts around this? Have you seen any examples of this?
Yeah, so I think I won't name any specific examples, because we're all sort of aware of what industries and organizations have done to the environment, and I wouldn't want to take any specific names, but it's genuinely high time that industries sort of begin placing the environment and um, the wildlife as their top priority. Of course, I
Mm-hmm.
understand that the consumers or profits might be the existing top priority, but humanity and the planet itself is in such a state that we can't really afford to focus the most on anything else except our environment, which is exactly why um, organizations responsible for the wild, like the WWF, would need to be diverting more resources towards, let's say, developing sustainable processes that will help reduce global warming, climate change, and in turn, of course, help save wildlife populations, because, as we discussed before, there's a correlation. And you know, let's say, for instance, if enough people work towards it, might only take a decade or two to develop a flawless system that cleans polluted water. But we don't have enough research in these areas yet, and we're not diverting our attention to it either, which is exactly why, you know, that's something that organizations that pride themselves on being responsible for the wild, being responsible for nature, need to really invest in the scientific department, and try to maximize, you know, maximize the uh, the habitats and wildlife populations. Which actually brings me to my next point. So, of course, I mean, it's easy for me to say, divert your resources, innovate and solve every problem we have. That's a very easy thing to say, but there's actually something that a lot of organizations aren't currently doing, which is adapting to existing technology, because we've made, like I said, we need a lot more developments in industrial processes to ensure cleaner water and cleaner air, etc., of course. But I believe that national wildlife organizations and even state wildlife organizations should really work towards implementing existing technology to good use. So I think the best example, and a lot of a lot of wildlife lovers will agree with me. The gypsies that they use in these national parks, uh, A, they guzzle a lot of fuel. B, they make a lot of noise, which disturbs the animal, and as a byproduct, you don't get as much time with the animal, which is exactly why. And the most disappointing thing out of all of this is that the state wildlife organizations or even the national wildlife organizations, they do have the funds, but they're, of course, you can't really blame them. They're diverting it towards salaries and whatnot to forest officers, but they do still have the remainder, and I believe that that should sort of be diverted towards maybe electronic jeeps. Of course,
Electric, yeah.
It's the 21st century, and we're in 2022. Electric vehicles need to uh, sort of be a lot more popular. It might not be plausible in the terrain of our forests, our Indian forests, but it's definitely something worth experimenting on, because, like I said, all you'd be using is electricity, which of course is a concern, but at least you're not directly affecting the environment, and B, you're not disturbing any animal whatsoever because, well, it's an electric vehicle. So yeah, that was my second suggestion. I think another important suggestion would be to sort of prevent the displacement of you know thousands of species by like strictly enforcing government policies about not letting industries um, you know set up their factories near forests, wildlife, streams, and because it's not only displacing a lot of species within the immediate environment, but it's also causing noise pollution, air pollution, land pollution, water pollution, and that will eventually drive away species within an even huger radius. So you're not, an industry is not just affecting the immediate species, they're also affecting um, species that could be as far away as an entire, maybe an entire city's worth of distance. And that's exactly why businesses and organizations, they really need to start focusing on implementing as many small and hopefully large scale changes as they can. And that's something that they really need to. It's the need of the hour. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, something that we work with a lot, for instance, is, and in tourism, one of the things that we talk a lot about is, the CRZ rule, which is the coastal region zone where, you're not allowed. And then now there's the environmentally sensitive zone, right, which is the space around the national parks. And I think I agree with you. I think that we don't realize, especially I think in hotels and resorts, the amount of waste that we create. And like you mentioned water pollution, but also in terms of just, typical waste that we create. It is really important to be very conscious of that, and
exactly,
be, yeah, and be sensitive that, this is actually not our land, right? I mean, we're kind of coming in to
we're
experience.
encroaching. Yeah,
We're the ones who are encroaching, and so I think to be mindful, respective of that. I think it's a very, I totally, and I really like the point that you made about small changes, because I think that that's where we can all start, right? In businesses, in industry, manufacturing as well. Like, I mean, if we can start with small things, like, so in the Tamarakud, you would have also noticed this, like, we keep our lights really dim, our
yeah,
sort of
right.
outdoor lights. And that's just because we don't want to disturb the
Waste. Yeah,
ecosystem, because
exactly.
no, and well, one, of course, electrical consumption, but really, we don't want to, like, if you put big bright lights, you're
Yeah,
going to end up
you're
confusing the
only going to
wildlife,
attract
actually.
moths. Nothing, no other animal would like that.
Exactly. And so we didn't want to confuse the animals. I mean, we're there, and we have a huge amount of wildlife on that property, actually, because we're organic as well.
Exactly.
And so as soon as you go organic, you're attracting just a whole amount of, um, wildlife and insects and everything. So we're very lucky with with the wildlife that we have there. Okay, so we've gotten some good questions. I thought
Huh.
we could start with this Sumnit from Sumnit. Do you constantly change your angle as you shoot to see what looks good when you get into your computer, or do you decide ahead of time? So I guess a question on
On
preparation.
photography. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so, Sumit, I think the best answer to your question would be, well, it depends, which isn't a great answer, I know, but you have to hear me out because you really need to analyze the situation that presents itself in front of you. You need to be able to think on spot and say, okay, look, I think a fantastic example is how my mentor Giant explained angles to me. So um, one of the things that he is sort of known for doing is, let's say, there's a sort of height difference between a mound and him when he's seated in his Jeep, of course. So what he actually does is he gets the Jeep driver to position it sideways, and when you shoot, obviously the tiger is going to start walking towards him, or whatever it is, it's going to start walking towards the Jeep, assuming. Then he ends up getting it eye level. But I think the briefest response I could give Sumit is the angles I use are just any angle that would get me an eye level shot. I think that's what I sort of try to prioritize, unless I'm trying to be creatively different and I'm trying to, let's say, highlight the size of, the sheer sort of size of the animal or the bird, or I'm trying to show how small it is. That as well, I would change my angle, and obviously, depending on the type of photography, you change your angles. If it's macro photography, you know. You can take eye level shots, but those would be boring. You ideally in a macro photograph, you're sort of narrating a story. There's a visual narrative in your images,
Hmm.
which is exactly why there's no correct answer to this question. There's just an explanation.
So it's adaptive, I guess what you're
Exactly.
saying, right?
Mm.
Um, okay, interesting. Okay, I have a couple of other ones. You mentioned the intersection of art and activism. How can young emerging artists fine-tune their practice, and how would you advise them on the process of finding the right mentorship and networks in which their work could be nurtured and also be making the most impact?
I think that's a great question. My primary advice would be to sort of look at as many photographers as you can, look at their portfolios, look at their work, see whose work resonates the most with you, whose work you wouldn't want to replicate, but you would want to sort of create similar photographs that give you, or rather give a viewer a very similar emotion. So for me, that was my dad, and as well as Giant, and loads of other photographers like Philip Ross and um, you know so many others that I've looked up to, and of course I've reached out to as many of them as I could, and the ones who did get back to me essentially aided my in my journey. And that's the same thing, art and activism. You find an artist who's also an activist. Maybe if you're a wildlife photographer who prioritizes the art side of it, but still wants to raise awareness. So I think a fantastic example is Shaz Jung, who's a great artist, and his works really drawn a lot of attention, and it's helped popularize, the Black Panther and so many other uh, subjects of Kabini.
Amazing. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, do you feel like I guess your aesthetic that how old you were saying, I mean, you said your father has inspired you a lot on that, but do you think, and you also mentioned that storytelling is a big part of sort of your process, but I guess you can't really predict those stories, right? And like you said, you have to adapt to it. So,
Exactly.
but is there anybody that you think has influenced not your technique, but the almost like the emotional part of the photography that you do, and like it, and I guess the aesthetic part of it, because it's very different from like being a technical photographer in a sense, right? So the artistic side of what you do you feel like there's any specific influences that you have?
Um, I would say that there's actually a plethora of influences which sort of just come together and make create this very messy but um, at the end of the day beautiful sort of feeling. And you know, this plethora includes my father's influence on me, Giant's influence on me, and I think my best friend Vedansh's influence on me. So all three of them, they've heavily mentored me, and I try to, or at least I believe that I try to sort of combine the best of both worlds, because you're obviously never going to find an artist or a photographer with the exact same principles as you. There's always going to be something different, and that's exactly why I think the best answer to that question would be take uh, the best of all worlds and just make it your own, or try to find your own niche. That also works well. That's something, at least the first 2 3 years, excuse me, the first 2 3 years, what I was doing was, heavily inspired off of my three mentors, and then I started finding my own niche and my own artistic element.
Hmm. Okay, so last question. Is there any specific animal that you said you don't like to promote like the big animals, but is there any specific animal that you, I guess, really enjoy photo, photographing?
Um, I would actually say
Like one that's really challenging, maybe even, right?
one that's challenging. That's definitely a leopard then. I really enjoy the challenge of photographing leopards because they're always sort of lazing in treetops, and it's hard to get a fantastic shot because there's always branches, there's distractions. But then sometimes they sort of bless you. They'll either come out on the road, they'll climb down a tree, maybe climb up, or just come out onto a perfectly still branch with a clean background, and then you'll just get this fantastic shot. So I think the unpredictability of leopards. I mean, most animals are generally unpredictable, but the leopards just take unpredictability to another level. So I think that that's something I really enjoy, and obviously, being an avid visitor to Kabini, which is the leopard's lair, I think I'm bound to sort of be partial towards them. So,
Yeah, I've not seen one yet. It's not happened for me. So at some point, I'm gonna grab you and I
yeah.
might say that, hey, listen, take me out. I want to get
Absolutely,
lucky.
absolutely. We'll cover the entire park, and we'll get every sighting.
Amazing. Thank you. So, all right, so that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Mayas, for joining me today and for participating in this conversation. It was really fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for
Um,
having me. It's been a
yeah,
great
no,
conversation.
it was really fun. And thanks for all the knowledge, because I think, one, it's incredible to get, I think, your perspective on wildlife and conservation, on activism, on artistry, on all of that photography. But it's also very cool to see this in somebody so young, right? And I'm sure people say this to you all the time, but just to repeat, it's really nice because I think that as a country, as a planet, we need young leaders, right, to come up and to be vocal about these things and showcase these, all of this that really makes a difference in the world and is benefiting the future of the planet and all those
Exactly.
that come after us. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for sharing your story. Everyone who joined, thank you so much for joining us today. All the friends, all of the supporters, it's been amazing to have you with us, and thank you for the questions that you shared as well. Thank you to my team who are superstars, and for arranging this, for organizing, for putting everything together in the back. And everyone, tomorrow we're going to have another great conversation. We'll be talking to Sarah Nicole Edwards, who runs and who's founded and runs Copper and Cloves, which is a cafe and resource community around clean eating. And we're going to be talking about a really popular topic, I think, which is health, environment, and the economic benefits of plant-based diet. So that'll be happening at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Hope to see many of you there. And again, thank you so much, Mayas. It's been a pleasure. Stay in touch with us at Tamara, and
Of course.
we hope we'll see you again at one of our properties. Maybe we can
Of
show you some
course.
more cool wildlife. You can see elephants in the Tamara Kurg as well.
Absolutely.
They come through once in a while. So great. Thanks so much. See you.
Thank you so
Bye,
much. Have a
everyone.
great day. Thank you,
You
everyone.
too.